All right, welcome everybody. This is Demystifying Web3 Attack Vectors. This presentation is honestly, it came about, in my opinion, as a direct follow-up to the webcast I gave almost exactly a year ago on getting started in blockchain security. So whenever I did that about a year ago, we dove pretty high level into smart contract auditing, and we talked about some of the higher vulnerabilities that have come about with regards to smart contract auditing. And one of the big things we got feedback from around that particular webcast was, okay, well, that's really deep. Like that stuff is really like in the woods or in the weeds, right? So what else is there that I could jump into to start learning about blockchain and Web3? And that's kind of where this presentation came from. So Steve and I, we actually are co-hosts of a podcast that we do called CoinSec Podcast. We've been doing for 3 years now. We're basically on a weekly-ish schedule. We talk about the latest hacks and exploits in the world of cryptocurrency, blockchain, Web3. And so we see pretty much all the hacks that happen, and we try to keep very much updated with them, and we talk about them every week. So with that, we kind of were able to mold into this presentation just this big high-level view of all the things to worry about when it comes to Web3, from social engineering perspectives, from smart contract exploits to all the different risks in play there. So that's kind of where this came from. And one thing you'll see throughout the slides is we mentioned earlier, but I chose not to go the traditional route of just throwing memes in every slide, and instead I went with generating AI generated art for this whole thing. So I used Midjourney and DALL-E for this. So if you see any pictures, that's where they came from. Let's introduce ourselves. So I am Beau Bullock. I am a pen tester, red teamer at Black Hills. I've been here for 8 years. As of about a couple years ago, I've been pretty much exclusively working in the cloud spectrum, as well as any sort of emerging tech like blockchain. So heavy into researching around blockchain security, blockchain attacks, and cloud attacks as well. And I teach a class on it. Steve?
Yep. So my name is Steve Borosh. I basically copied Beau's block and put it into mine because we do a lot of the same things. Pen tester, red teamer at Black Hills. Also an author of a class, Enterprise Attack Initial Access, where I talk about gaining access to enterprises via phishing attacks, web attacks, that kind of thing, getting that initial foothold. But at the same time, also help Beau with some of our blockchain work and co-host the CoinSec podcast. So it's cool to be here, and look forward to doing this webcast with you.
All right, so roadmap for today. We're going to start out with just a high-level view of what is Web3. So what are we even talking about when we say Web3? You know, there's like Web5 out now, I think. The Jack Dorsey.
Where was 4?
Yeah, exactly. Where was 4? And we're going to talk about some of the common Web3 attacks with case studies, because pretty much every single thing you see throughout the slides today, there's probably been a legit real world case that we've talked about on CoinSec, where like that hack has happened in real life. And we're going to point to some very specific examples throughout that. So we'll talk about how Web2 attacks are still affecting Web3 apps. We'll talk about social engineering, which is I would say the biggest risk to consumers. So we're going to talk about a lot of the consumer risk around Web3 and blockchain. We're going to talk about administrative issues. So how are keys and tokens being handled? How are coins being stored? How is the administrative capability around smart contracts handled? We'll talk about smart contract hacks a little bit. I kept it a small section today because I did talk about that quite a bit in the webcast from last year. But I still wanted to kind of at least give a high level of those today. And then what are attackers doing with stolen funds? I think this is a pretty cool section, because I'm going to show you some tools and techniques for tracking transactions. So if you ever see, this multi-million-dollar hack happen against a smart contract, I'm going to show you how to track and determine where those funds went, and possibly even attribute who was the attacker. And then finally, I'm going to leave you with some resources on just getting started in hacking Web3. All right. So Steve, you want to kick us off with what is Web3?
Yes, it's a bunch of autonomous robots coming at you. This is a cool picture. You'll see from the slides, Beau's into the AI generated stuff. Mine are just, yes, copy and paste from places on the internet. So before we can talk about Web3, we kind of have to recap Web2 just a little bit. Web2 being basically the start of the World Wide Web or the internet. So you have a server that hosts a web server, which hosts some kind of content, right? As you can see on the right, we originally started out with the browser wars. We had Netscape and then Internet Explorer and others. But it was very closed source, right? You couldn't see what's going on the back end. You couldn't see the code that's running the site unless, you can view some of the source and see the HTML, but the underlying technologies aren't always present. And it's very disjoined, right? Signing into one site doesn't mean you're going to sign into other sites with the same credentials or the same authentication mechanism. So going from one place to another on the internet has typically been kind of hard, especially before the advent of search engines. We had to manually find websites and go to them with web crawlers and things like that. So it's really come a long way from this closed source, centralized platform of web technologies to Web3. Go ahead, next slide, please. To where we now have this decentralized based on blockchain technology. What does that mean based on blockchain technology? So that means you can do authentication with your MetaMask or other wallet, right? We can authenticate to the blockchain and then run the apps that are based on that blockchain with that wallet authentication. So it gives us this way to authenticate across a specific technology and not have to do multiple authentications and things like that. Multi-platform specific, what I mean by that is each platform or each blockchain can have its own type of code or run its own type of software. So one of the big ones being Ethereum, right? The code that's running our web apps or distributed applications typically is what we think about with Web3. It's finance driven, has been for a while. That being said, you have things like automated market makers where you can go trade and swap coins and do liquidity pools and all kinds of farms and these other things to try to earn more money, kind of like what you would do with normal stocks and things like that to earn interest and whatnot. But it's all done on the blockchain and in Web3 now. And it's incentivized with play to earn. So on the right is one of the first kind of play to earn games that I came across on the Ethereum chain. So was this Neon District, right? You could build characters, you could fight battles against other groups of characters, and then you earn in-game cryptocurrency, and then you can sell your characters and all that kind of stuff, upgrade their attributes. And actually, it's basically an NFT, right? It's basically an image that has attributes assigned to it. With the Web3 being very finance driven, there has to be some kind of backend to the code that's running, right? We still have something running something. That is typically Node.js on the backend. It's a lot of JavaScript. But then we've maybe heard about IPFS or interplanetary file system. It's one of my kind of favorite things to dive into on the internet these days because it's a distributed kind of file sharing platform where your files are basically hashed. So you have a long string and that identifies where your file is on the network. So we see distributed web hosting can be done this way. So here's an example for the 1-inch trading app, and we can see the long URL up there. That's because it has to go through a gateway to get to the back end. So there's these entry points or gateways that we have to use in order to connect to that distributed backend. And we think of NFT images typically associated with interplanetary file system as interplanetary file system holds static content. So that could be websites, it could be images, metadata, or other content such as videos, things like that. And we have APIs on the back end as well. So it actually makes it a little more centralized than what we think. So we think about Web3 is supposed to be this decentralized web of technologies that all kind of interact with each other and work together. But to get to those, typically blockchains, you have to have some sort of API. So we have like Infura for Ethereum. We have BSC Dataseed for Binance Smart Chain. So we take our wallet, like our MetaMask or something like that, Trust Wallet or something, and then we point it at one of these gateways that allows us to talk to that network, allows our wallet to talk to that network. We could also attach to our own nodes or custom RPC endpoints, but it really does make a this decentralized web have a point of failure, right? With these centralized gateways. If something happened to the Infura API, and you can see right here, the request volumes for Infura are very large. So we get a lot of traffic for different blockchains. And if one of those services go down, which they have before, then you can't conduct business on those, right?
Yeah, and MetaMask by default would point to Infura, and Infura has an outage. It's like now nobody that uses MetaMask can send transactions. That's a bad day.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like the whole cloud situation. It's being managed by somebody else, but at the same time, if there's any downtime, there's really nothing you can do about it but sit back and wait.
Yep.
All right. Next slide, please. Web3 is still a repeat offender. I talked a little bit about this already. So it still runs on code, which is running on hardware somewhere, which is operated by humans. So we have things like web attacks against websites, remote code execution against backend hardware and servers and things like that might be running some of these nodes. And then phishing, right? Your email phish, your SMS phishing. We'll talk about some of that stuff coming up, but humans being the weak point in that part of the chain. And then much of Web3 still uses DNS, right? Domain naming service. So in order to resolve names to IP addresses, we still have to use DNS. And like to get to Infura, you have to use DNS. In your wallet, you're pointing it to a DNS address. It has to resolve to an IP, and then you can connect to it. So DNS still is a layer that's there, even though we see on this next slide that we have other naming systems for each chain. For example, the Ethereum naming system, which does just that. It maps human readable names such as BHIS.eth to addresses and content hashes and metadata on the chain. So other blockchains have their own naming systems. You can check out docs.ens.domains to see what you can go to register your own ENS name and then point it to your data and things like that.
So one thing that I think is really interesting here is that this, I think, between this slide and I was talking about IPFS for web hosting, you can actually create an entirely decentralized website that you navigate to in a browser with a .eth address. So like the Brave browser already recognizes .eth addresses and will try to resolve them to the IPFS hosted site behind that address. So like, for example, if we set up a decentralized website, hosted all the content on IPFS, and then use an ENS name, you could theoretically navigate to a decentralized website purely with an ENS name.
Right, and that's because we're not resolving host names to IP, we're resolving names or like BHIS.eth to addresses on IPFS, right? To hashes on IPFS. It links to the content that the name is tied to on the chain, right?
Yep, exactly.
And then, so what does that mean for, say, the keys to the kingdom? Typically, if we had keys to the Web2 kingdom, it would be like your SSH key to the server, right? You can get root access, you can get access to a database or something like that. In the case of Web3, it's more along the lines of private keys. So the typically 256-bit or whatever private key that is protecting your wallet that should be near impossible to brute force. Or a mnemonic seed phrase, which is a 12-word seed phrase that can also be used to decrypt your wallet, something that's a little more memorizable. Just memorize 12 words. You can cross country borders, fly across the world, reopen your wallet with your mnemonic seed no matter where you're at. Now, keep in mind, you still have to talk to like Infura or a custom RPC gateway to be able to load your wallet. So if you're in a country that restricts Infura, then you can't get to your wallet through Infura. So things like that. Token approvals, this is a big one. We see a lot, and we'll talk about phishing and things like that with token approvals, to whereas a site says, hey, you want to trade 50 of this token for 100 of this token, we need to approve the transfer of those 50 tokens. Well, instead of approving 50 tokens, it approves 100 tokens. Now that site can transfer 100 tokens out of your wallet. So you have to keep in mind and pay attention to those approvals. And there are ways to go in and revoke those approvals en masse. And then vulnerable smart contracts, right? That we have code, right, running somewhere. So if the code is vulnerable, then we can maybe take advantage of that to do things on our behalf, such as transferring tokens, withdrawing funds from a contract, or just nuking the contract itself, making it so that nobody else can use it. Denial of service, things like that. So these things are what are considered the keys to the kingdom to Web3, basically.
Yeah. So with that in mind, like what is it that attackers want? They want those things, right? And it's very, very common for attackers to social engineer consumers and to try to obtain those items, right? So let's talk about some of the things that we just mentioned and how they're actually stealing them. So first off, let's talk about private keys and seeds. So private keys, just like Steve mentioned, you can back up private keys into clear text format. You can back up seed phrases in a clear text format. And most wallets natively have that capability. It's usually just re-enter your password to obtain that clear text version of your private key. So what attackers end up doing is they try to phish and say, hey, you need to back up your key, and to do that you need to enter your seed phrase into this random website that I just sent you, and they'll trick users into entering their seed phrase, which then the attacker now has and is able to recreate the wallet, and then they just transfer all the funds out of it. Another thing that actually recently, it was just what was it? I guess like the beginning of August. Like browser extensions and certain wallets have been known to do, let's just say, less than optimal security practices with your seed phrase. So Slope Wallet was one that earlier this month, or I guess we're in September now, but earlier in August, they were found sending seed phrases in clear text to a third-party telemetry service, so like a logging service. So it was crazy when this was happening. Everyone was freaking out. Like nobody had any idea. Like why are all my Solana tokens just being sent to these random addresses? And when you're investigating this, the first thing we ask is like, all right, it's got to be token approvals, or it's got to be their private keys were compromised. And in learning about this one, the wallet itself was actually sending these clear text out, and $4.1 million was stolen due to that. So token approvals. This is honestly, I would say, one of the biggest or most popular attacks that attackers are doing right now to consumers, and it's something that if you don't understand what is happening, it's very easy to get scammed in this type of attack. So the best way that I like to describe it is if you imagine like a typical application requesting permissions to do something, like whether it's a mobile app that's requesting permissions to have access to your images on your phone, or access to your email, or maybe we're talking about OAuth apps, right? Like that's one of the things that we talk about in phishing a lot on the red team side, is creating malicious OAuth apps and requesting permissions within somebody's account. And with those types of attacks, generally the victim receives a prompt that just says, hey, this is trying to access this, right? And all they have to do is click approve. And then now that application or whoever requested that access has access to do something. So token approvals is a very similar type of attack, where an attacker will trick a user into approving an attacker wallet to spend tokens on their behalf. And this can be traditional ERC20 style tokens, but it can also be NFTs. And that's something that we see happen a lot over the last year, is users are tricked into basically approving that the attacking wallet now has the ability to transfer on their behalf. And all they do is click approve and create that token approval, and then the attacker just drains it, just takes everything. So in a lot of these scams, whenever you see this happen, one of the first things you want to look for is, well, hey, did I accidentally go approve any malicious contracts? And there's a couple places to do that. So revoke.cash is one of the main places. And then etherscan.io also has its own token disapproving service, basically. So you can go there and you can disapprove certain addresses from having approval to do things on your account. And it will show you everything you've granted a token approval for. So that's a good place to at least look to see if you have any token approvals that you've done in the past. And that another thing I'd point out here too is that in some cases, it might not necessarily be that you were phished and you approved tokens for a malicious contract, but maybe you approved spending on a popular website, right? Now, what if that popular site, what if their contract is compromised, right? So like, for example, actually, I think this would be a great example, swapping site like Uniswap. So when you go to Uniswap, you have to approve Uniswap's contract to spin on your behalf if you go to trade. Now, if Uniswap's contract ever was compromised, or the keys that are managing that, then potentially attacker would be able to take quite a bit because a lot of people have approved it. Malicious token airdrop. So this is another scam that happens really often in the cryptocurrency world. This is one where anyone, so myself, Steve, like we can generate fake ERC20 tokens like that. Like it's very easy to just create your own smart contract. There's wizards for it at this point, where you give it a name, you give it the amount of tokens you want to create, and then it will mint them. And what attackers have started doing is they've started creating these fake tokens that look like they're some sort of airdrop that is related to some other service. And then they'll just airdrop them to like thousands of wallets. And what people will do is they'll see this fake token in their account and they'll say, oh, well, this looks interesting. What is this? And then they'll go to the website that is in the name. So like in this example, the fake Uniswap airdrop that happened in July, an attacker was able to actually spoof Uniswap's name on Etherscan, which was, first of all, that was very interesting. And then when a user received these tokens, there was a website basically in the token name that said to go to this malicious site. And when they went there, they went to claim their official Uniswap tokens, and in fact were doing the token approval attack that I just mentioned, right? And that ended up draining $8 million from wallets. All right, Discord hacks. This is a fun section. So this is a huge problem and has been. So first off, Discord was built for like video gaming services, or for like communities around gamers, right? Like that's the reason it even exists. And everyone, including all of Infosec, has started using Discord for a lot of other fun purposes. So Discord has been targeted heavily. Pretty much every crypto project, every blockchain project has its own Discord server as well. Like I said, it's targeted towards gamers, not necessarily the most security-minded community necessarily. And this is why we've seen a ton of hacks. So actually, I just included this tweet at the bottom of the slide this morning because so Zach XBT, he's actually a really awesome investigator that investigates into a ton of these scams, ton of these hacks. And just this morning, he tweeted this. So since December of 2021, we've seen 600 plus Discord servers compromised and 12 plus NFT related Twitter accounts hacked as well. This has resulted in millions of dollars stolen. So like I said, so let's talk about some of like these methods that Discords are getting hacked. One of the big ones is just straight up traditional credential compromise and weak passwords. So Discord admins, moderators that are within Discord will get scammed, right? So they'll get sent a message requesting to approve another application to do something, right? Or they'll get tricked into visiting a malicious website, right? Jason, I use 100-character password. So what's funny about 100-character passwords is that doesn't actually help with session stealing attacks. So even somebody with a 100-character password, if they get phished with like an Evil Gen X2 type of server that we would use for traditional phishing, right? We will obtain those session tokens that are associated with that account, and then can just leverage the session tokens to authenticate, never needing the password. So that's one of the big things, right? The next thing is DM scams. So it's gotten so bad at this point where if you drop into a high-profile Discord server, it's almost within minutes that you will get DM'd by some scammer that is trying to jump on like the hype or whatever around you getting there. And this is one of the things that I find very annoying about Discord is that by default, any new server you join, DMs are enabled by default. So anyone that's on that same server as you can DM you, right? If you leave DMs enabled. So that's something you can turn off. That's in privacy settings. Webhook compromise. This is another one that happens all the time. So webhooks. Think about bots, right? Like if you create a bot for your server that is managing something, they need access to perform actions within your account. So in order to do that, Discord has created this concept of a webhook, and all it is a URL. And those webhooks can be given certain permissions as well. So if, for example, your application discloses a webhook, which actually Steve and I, we were messing around with a bug bounty for a crypto site. At one point, we found a webhook just exposed on a random page on the app.
Yeah.
Tends to get included in code sometimes for, they're used for automation. Just like we talk about secrets getting included in like GitHub repos, that kind of thing happens with webhooks.
Seen mods sharing their screen or doing YouTube or Twitch or whatever, and then accidentally their key comes across the screen for a split second, and it's before they can do anything about it, it's gone. Right, somebody's copied it.
And then the last thing here is just straight up the popular bots that are already out there. Getting compromised themselves. So, like the Me6 bot, this is one that is in, thousands of Discords and all the popular Discords that are out there. This one had an issue where it was compromised and then used to perform these crazy high scale scams in hundreds of Discords, and they were targeted too. So in most cases, the bots themselves, they need permissions to do most of the administrative stuff. So what they'll end up doing is they'll lock down the Discord so nobody can comment, right? So nobody can see if there's any like scammy messages going on, right? So they'll just block everybody. They'll block all the admins from typing anything. They'll lock the admins out of their accounts completely, and then they'll start posting scam links, and they'll try to make it super hypey to try to get anybody to click on it. And it's usually pretty profitable for these attackers. SIM swaps. So this is not specific to crypto by any means, but it is one that we have seen quite a bit in the crypto world. Actually, Jack Resider, Darknet Diaries, he has an episode where he talks about crypto-related SIM swapping, and it's epic. It's an epic episode. Highly recommend checking that one out. But basically, the gist of SIM swapping is the attacker tricks your phone carrier into migrating your phone number to their own phone. And why is that important? Because most of the time, a lot of these sites, they leverage SMS-based messaging for either 2FA or password resets. And so, whenever those are combined, it makes it very easy for attackers to get in if they're able to leverage SIM swap successfully. Rugpulls. So this is one I would say like a very crypto specific term here. But it has since become a term that we use for all kinds of stuff. But basically the gist is a rug pull is when a project appears to be legit and then exits, right? So a scam where a team gets investors to buy into it. Usually they try to make it look extremely legit. They'll have a website with a bunch of pictures of people that look like they should be there. They will usually be undoxed in most cases, meaning like you don't actually see them, or they'll use fake profiles so that it appears like they're doxed, but they're really not. And what they'll do is they'll just leave. They'll bail out with whatever investor funds have been put into it. There's a couple of different types of rugs, right? So hard rugs are where developers straight up code in backdoors and then they just dump the funds. So things like a smart contract where they have input functions that allow them to just straight up exfil any of the tokens within it. And then soft rugs where a team just dumps tokens where they just severely devalue the investor funds itself. So there's some ways to kind of potentially spot these. Undoxed team, definitely, that's a huge red flag. So if you see a project that is something where like they are absolutely just hidden, being secretive, usually that's a red flag. If there's no locked liquidity in a pool, so liquidity, so in the world of DeFi, in order to create a market, you have to have liquidity for certain types of tokens and different coins. And if there's nothing locked, or if you don't see that the liquidity is being locked, that could indicate a problem as well. And the third thing, code isn't public. All right, so this is one of the things that Steve mentioned earlier around Web3 apps and why they're quite different from Web2 is that in pretty much 99% of cases, all the code is open source. Smart contract code, web code, all of it. So if code isn't public, that usually might be a red flag as well. Honey contracts. So this is a scam where investors deposit funds and they can't recover them. And this could be something that is less on the I guess obvious side of things, right? Like it might look like it's a traditional application that that a user might want to invest in. However, the withdraw function doesn't work, so it just locks liquidity there completely. Another type of honey type of wallet, so to speak, that we've seen before is where attackers, what they'll do is they'll put out a private key for a wallet that appears to have a certain amount of tokens in it, right? So it'll look like it has something that is not the actual native token or the native coin to that blockchain, and it could be like just an ERC20 token within it. Now, one of the big problems with, or I guess not necessarily a problem, one of the I guess mechanisms for how transactions are sent, specifically on Ethereum's blockchain, is you have to pay what are called gas fees. So in order to send gas fees, you have to have ETH or Ether in a wallet to send those tokens out. So examples of honey contracts and honey tokens we've seen in the past is where an attacker will put a token in a wallet, they'll post the private key or the seed phrase to that wallet publicly, and then people will try to send ETH into the address to exfil those tokens for the gas fees, and then they'll just automatically they'll have a programmatically just exfil the ETH that is sent in. Offensive dApps. Do you want to talk about this one, Steve, and lead into the next section?
Yeah, so I just wanted to throw in there that the Web3 platform basically could also be used as offensive tooling. So Beau and I both phish people. We hack into companies. We do all this offensive stuff for BHIS. And part of that is phishing. So when we phish with what's called a Microsoft device code, we send somebody to Microsoft.com device login. They enter a code, and then we are able to access their session on the other side or wherever we're at. So how we do that is we use Cores Anywhere. It's basically an open source GitHub program that allows you to redirect Cores traffic. So we use Flux. We use the Flux network to run on Flux. There's a Cores Anywhere app on there, and then I can use that to redirect the user's traffic to login.microsoftonline.com. So then they sign in and we get their authentication token. So offensive dApps can be used as well. If you get something like this and it came from nowhere, you can right click and check the source code. You see anything like that in there redirecting to a site, or even comments that says Flux Web3 smiley face, right? That's probably my doing. Yeah, check it out. Be careful out there because this can be used offensively as well.
All right, Web2 attacks affecting Web3 apps. Let's talk about some of the common ones. I'll let Steve run through this one since I talked for too long.
So WebApp front-end attacks, Beau actually talked about one of these earlier, supply chain issues, right? So somebody infects the code that is getting deployed, let's say a wallet app. A wallet's going to get pushed to the phone, and you're able to compromise the company that creates the wallet app and then put some malicious code into the app. They get it signed, they push it out to Android or iOS. Now you've backdoored that code. We see that in websites with things like Node.js, right? Having dependencies that can then be backdoored. So one of those examples, pre-mint hack, 500K was stolen, where malicious code injected into a website. So a lot of websites run Node.js and JavaScript. If you can inject some sort of JavaScript into that site, you can then have it do things on your behalf, redirect users, have them sign in somewhere, create pop-ups, right, to verify their wallet ownership, and then have a token approval, their malicious token approval. This is what we're talking about with web front-end attacks. Then there's always DNS, right? DNS is 90% of the problem of the internet. Domain naming system, I talked about it a little bit earlier, resolves IP addresses from names. So DNS, Curve Finance was hacked this last month, and their website was redirected users to a copy, just like I said, to approve a malicious contract. So I believe it was a subdomain takeover or something like that was compromised for that case, but no, it was the DNS server. Nobody really nailed it down, right, Beau? But it's something the DNS server might have been compromised in that case.
Yep,
I think. And then we have BGP, so Order Gateway Protocol, where we can assign net blocks to specific regions. So ClaySwap was a BGP hijack victim. There was actually another one in the news this morning or last night as well for a few $1 million. So BGP, if you can say, hey, your website is over at my IP address, then all of those users will come to your IP address, and then whatever you have hosted there, they can interact with. Maybe you clone the website, you get them to sign in, steal creds, token approvals, things like that. So DNS and BGP continue to be a problem, even in the Web3. And then node compromise. So compromise of the underlying, Node.js or the underlying Ethereum node, right? And we see bridges now where you can bridge different types of cryptocurrencies. So trade Bitcoin for Ethereum or Ethereum for Zcash or something like that, right? It's called a bridge. So with those bridges, it gives more attack surface. So we've got multiple servers, we have multiple bits of code that have to interact with each other, and everything has to work correctly without flaw. And sometimes that doesn't always happen, such as the case of the Ronin bridge, where a key was compromised and the amount of 650 million was stolen at that time.
Yeah, so that was one of the the biggest one of the biggest hacks in crypto that we've seen so far.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's huge number, right?
Yeah, but it makes you think like 5 of 9 validator nodes were compromised, and Sky Mavis controlled 4 of those nodes. How much of this is actually decentralized?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that when we look at bridges now, which by the way, bridge hacks, there's been maybe 10 or more in the last year that have resulted in multi-million dollar hacks. Like if I would say the bridges are probably one of the weakest points in all of blockchain. And I really want to delineate the difference between bridges and exchanges, right? So we're not talking about an exchange where you're just trading Bitcoin for Ethereum. We're talking about code that is attempting to migrate 2 completely separate blockchain assets across each other. And so that's what these bridges are for. So,
yep. So more attack surface because there's more code, more servers, more people, all that kind of stuff. So those bridges are high value targets. We have to talk about traditional vulnerabilities that affect Web3. So talked about JavaScript injection, where we can inject code into a Web3 app or a website and get it to perform actions for users, sign wallets, things like that. Also a case of NFT poisoning. If you can poison the metadata on an NFT or the image itself, whatever's rendering that might render it in a certain way. So if there's a new platform that stands up that's hosting NFTs and you want to go see if you can get cross-site and script XXS going in that, then you can maybe inject some code onto your NFT, sell it on the platform. When it renders your NFT and the metadata, maybe you can find some code injection, and that has actually happened. To some sites.
Yeah, so there's, when you look at NFTs, it's not just JPEGs. A lot of times there's all the different file formats you could imagine, right? And SVGs are one of those that we've seen injected with code.
Third-party web technology. So a lot of these crypto sites do host, let's just say, a website with a blog or something like that. I've actually seen cases where I've tested WordPress crypto sites, and they had a node running on that site, and I was able to get into the node as the owner of the database and get their key and all that kind of stuff. So you have to be careful if you're running third-party technologies that you secure those just as well as you do the main network and stuff. And with that, SQL injection, another type, right? User information could be compromised, private keys, seed words, passwords, usernames, all that kind of stuff. If it's running a database on the back end, it's a website. And then there's malicious or vulnerable code there. SQL injection or command injection could be some traditional vulnerabilities that would be used there. And remote code execution on the infrastructure. So if you have a server that's running some code out there, it's running your website, it's running Node.js, right? And somebody compromises the server, maybe SSH is open with a password, or maybe there's a port running open with a web server, but it's got a remote code execution flaw in it. So some of those traditional attacks can still apply to the underlying technologies.
All right. So this section's on administrative issues. You want to cover this one too, Steve?
Yeah. Not much here, so I'll cover this one. Administrative issues. So we have the private key storage, right? We have to store our private keys in our seed phrases in secure locations. So typically, if you're really thinking about security, you're going to use some kind of hardware that connects to your computer. You have to enter maybe a code or use some kind of multi-factor. You can use software to do it, or it's on a centralized exchange where you don't actually hold your own private key, right? The exchange holds your private key. They typically are a custodian for your funds. Multi-sig, so we have to have multiple people come together and sign to make a contract valid or make a transaction valid. So if you're running an exchange like Binance, your cold wallet, right, that has hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of Bitcoin in it that are sitting there in cold storage, you don't want just to lose one key and have somebody be able to open up the cold storage and transfer out all of the vault, right? You want to have multiple authentities. So the CTO and the COO or whoever it is in the company, multiple keys, they have to come together and sign to transfer those assets. Who could transfer assets or mint tokens, right? Voting rights or proposals on the DAO should be talked about here a little bit, because DAOs or voting rights, if you have a majority stake in an asset, then maybe you have more voting rights on that platform. So that can kind of lead to more centralization in who's voting for what, right? So we have to keep in mind those administrative issues there. And then who can freeze assets or blacklist your wallet? Infura can. Infura can say, hey, we've seen transaction from Tornado Cash, right? We're not going to allow your transactions on here. Infura could put that on the gateway. A website such as so an NFT hosting website could say, hey, you can't authenticate with that address that's been used before to do this. So any of those places that can centrally control whether or not you can authenticate with an address can do those checks on the back end and freeze you from using their platform, maybe not the blockchain itself, right? The centralized exchange attacks, not your keys, not your crypto. They custodize your crypto and hold the keys on your behalf. So they could be vulnerable to many security risks, right? The attack surface is more on their playing field, right? They could be phished, they could be social engineered or SIM swapped just the same as you could, or even more so because they're a bigger target, a bigger attack surface. Bitfinex had a breach in 2016, 72 million stolen at the time, which would be about 2 billion today. And those alleged hackers were arrested and the coins were seized. So we don't see that a lot with, and Beau talk about this and what are people doing with the funds, but we don't see that as much with Web3 as we do like centralized exchange attacks, where typically you have to do some kind of know your customer, provide your ID or something like that.
Well, so these specific attackers, though, they did something, they made a few mistakes, right? Right, Steve? I mean, here, I think the next slide kind of shows something they probably shouldn't have done.
Yeah, don't host your own backups, right? Unencrypted with weak passwords on your cloud. Cloud, again, not your keys, not your crypto, not your drive, not your space. So it's hosted somewhere else. It can be seized, it can be taken, or denial of service, whatever. And in the case of the Liechtenstein case, where we saw the duo from New York who had stolen all, what is it now? 4 billion?
Well,
billion?
so yeah, at the time it was like 4, but now it's down to 2.
Markets.
Yeah.
Anyways, 2 or 4, lots of billions. And they had zips containing the wallets, which were then cracked because they had weak passwords on the zip files. So just
seriously,
be cognizant of where you're storing your keys and your crypto, using encrypted thumb drives or some kind of encryption service or whatever, right?
Imagine having $4 billion and just hosting that key on Google Drive.
On Google Drive, yeah.
It's crazy. All right, so smart contract attacks. So like I said, I'm gonna keep this section kind of short today because I want to, have this in here as obviously it's one of the biggest issues with all of blockchain security at the moment. But I did want to highlight a lot of the other things that I didn't talk about in the last webcast. So some common smart contract attacks that we see these days, and again, like if you're not familiar with smart contracts, you're not familiar with like what that is, the quick rundown you can get from the last webcast, but also it's basically just code that gets executed when you submit a transaction. That is the extremely compacted version of it. But you can program pretty much anything you want. You want to make a market, you can create the ability for users to send transactions and trade currency, send NFTs. Sell a house. You can do all kinds of stuff with smart contracts. So access control, one of the primary best practices in all of security in general, right, is who's an admin, who's an owner. Same thing is with smart contract security. So who can transfer assets, who can mint tokens, who can vote on proposals, who can freeze transfers. Usually it's the account that actually submitted and posted that contract to the blockchain. So if that account gets compromised, or if they're malicious insider, then potentially they could drain an account. Oracle manipulation is one that we've seen a lot of over this past year. We've probably talked about 20 or 30 stories on our podcast of just Oracle manipulation attacks, and so a lot of the decentralized world still relies on a lot of centralized data. So things like the weather, right? Like the blockchain doesn't know what the weather is, right? If you're going to trade based off of if it's raining on a given day, you got to get that data from somewhere, right? So oracles are basically that off-chain, thing that you can
price setter, basically.
Yeah, price setter. That's a good, It's an off-chain way of getting data. And so smart contracts that are on these decentralized nodes that are running, getting executed in a decentralized fashion can send requests to these centralized oracles, right? And so if you can manipulate that oracle in any way, and what we typically see is where attackers are manipulating these centralized oracles to either increase the value of a token extremely high or drop it extremely low to sell at a massive gain, right? Reentrancy is another really common one that we've seen, where basically the idea here is that whenever you execute a function, so let's say that I was executing a trade that sent an amount of a token. Reentrancy would be where an attacker can execute that function, but then prior to the balance actually getting updated in the contract, it re-enters into the same function again and then sends again. Reenters and sends prior to it ever hitting the function where it actually updates the balance. So that type of attack is another one where people drain funds. Front running is a really interesting one, where basically the idea is with Ethereum transactions, and honestly with pretty much any blockchain, you have this time period where miners are processing those transactions and trying to validate what those transactions are actually for, and if they're legit transactions. And during that time period, miners are actually incentivized to mine transactions with higher gas fees, right? So if I submit a transaction with a higher gas fee, a miner is going to say, oh, hey, I can actually make more by mining that transaction first. I can earn more. And so front running is this idea of where you watch for profitable transactions that are being submitted to a blockchain, and then you copy the exact same transaction, except you pay a higher gas fee and effectively front run the first transaction and have your transaction processed before theirs. So that's another really common thing that we see. So what are attackers doing with stolen funds? And we've got about 10 minutes left. I think we can get through it. We might run over a little bit, but we've got about 10 minutes left. All right, so transaction tracking. One of the first things that I would do, so if I saw that a hack occurred, or if I was alerted to something, I'll show you in a second, but we have bots set up now that alert us to certain interesting things. But if I see something like that, one of the first things I would do is go to Etherscan and just take a look at the transaction attributes on a site like etherscan.io. So with Etherscan, you can put in a transaction hash, you can put in wallet addresses, and you can get a lot of data from that. You can see how much was sent, where it was sent to and from, and you can get just a general idea around those specific transactions. And one thing that I would keep in mind here is that each blockchain have their own specific block explorer. So Solana has its own block explorer, Cardano has its own block explorer, Bitcoin has its own block explorer, that kind of things. But the majority of hacks we see these days are on the Ethereum blockchain because it's one of the most popular ones right now. Debuggers. All right, so smart contracts get really, really deep and complex. And whenever you submit a transaction, usually it's not just like an A to B kind of thing happening. Usually it's like there's 30 different calls that happen whenever you send that transaction. And so tracking through those transactions to actually determine what happened for that malicious transaction can be difficult. It sometimes can be a little hard to understand what exactly occurred. So there are various debuggers out there. So Tenderly.co, and then BlockSec is another security company that has a great tool. This is actually an output from it, where you can see each individual call of a specific transaction. So this is all from one transaction, where you see the different calls for the different values that are being sent, because you can actually call multiple functions within a single transaction. I saw somebody posted in the Discord just now, breadcrumbs. Yeah, so breadcrumbs is on this slide and is honestly one of my favorite investigation tools for tracking tracking where funds came from and where they go to. So the biggest thing with tracking transactions is attribution, right? So one of the biggest things that we've heard about for years is like, oh, Bitcoin transactions are anonymous, and that's just gonna it's impossible to track, right? That is completely false. In most cases, you can track transactions back to a centralized exchange where those funds initially came from, or you can track it to a centralized exchange where they're cashing out. And so this is why attribution becomes very key. So if you think about it, an attacker who steals $1 million, where are they going to spend $1 million in ETH besides like buying more NFTs, right? Which again, you track that on the blockchain. Eventually, they typically have to go cash out somewhere. And the majority of exchanges these days that actually allow you to convert cryptocurrency to fiat, they do these things called KYC, which is know your customer, which is basically the process of providing your identification. And you won't even be able to trade unless you've done KYC in most cases. So attributing transactions to where they are actually resulting in somebody either cashing out at a centralized exchange where they've done KYC, or cashing or sending KYC based cryptocurrency from an exchange to start with, right? And so that's one of the things we try to look at when we look at like, where did this attacker get the funds and where's it going to? Is did they ultimately end up cashing out at a centralized exchange? And then there's paid software too. So Chainalysis is one of the leading firms out there for like paid forensic investigations, and they have really great attribution like databases. One of the things that is a huge issue in the world of crypto and blockchain is this basically concept of money laundering, where you can mix your tokens via these various smart contracts and different mixers that are out there. So Tornado Cash is probably the most popular one that gets used these days, and we see almost daily where people are putting in a couple hundred ETH, which is a lot of money, into these mixers. And effectively what they do is they just pool all these funds together into this pool of mixed funds. They mix it up, and then when you pull it out, most of the time you can't determine where it came from. Now, so Steve, we've had quite a bit of news around Tornado over the last few weeks, right?
Yeah. Apparently it's bad.
Well, all right. So apparently it's bad that's what is that? I guess like it depends on your viewpoint, right? Because
exactly.
Like privacy related people, right? People that are just using it for privacy concerns, which it's like the argument against Tor, or the argument against Signal, right? Should my message should I be able to obscure my messages, right?
Right.
Well, should I be able to obscure my transactions so that nobody knows where that's coming from? Well, anyways, so sanctions have since been placed on Tornado, and a lot of centralized exchanges, a lot of sites like Infura have started blocking transactions that come from wallets that originated at Tornado or have interacted with Tornado Cash. So one of the things that I ended up doing maybe a month or so ago now, I created a bot that's in our CoinSec Discord that basically just keeps an eye on Tornado deposits. So this bot basically, anytime somebody deposits large amounts of ETH into the Tornado Cash contract, it alerts us. And you can get alerted too. If you join our CoinSec Discord, there's a tornado icon in the channel where the Tornado Cash bot is, and you just click that icon and it will alert you in Discord. So these are some examples from just a couple of days ago, right? So we saw a 1,000 ETH deposit, right? Massive amounts into Tornado. And it's like, where did that come from, right? And so you start researching, okay, well, where did that ETH come from? And a lot of times you can track it back to an exploit against a smart contract.
Yeah.
Yep. And so there's a link to our Discord there too. And then cashing out. So this is where things get gray area, right, Steve? Like, it's hard to really understand what exactly happens with those funds after they mix them and take them somewhere, because in most cases they can't cash out at a centralized exchange because there's KYC. ATMs, like maybe. Decentralized exchanges, but gift cards is one of the big ones that we've seen attackers do, right? Like they'll go buy gift cards with crypto. I think that was one of the things that the Bitfinex hackers did, right?
Hey, I just stole $200 million. I'd like to put it on this Walmart card, please.
I'd like to buy your Walmart.
Yeah.
All of it. All right, so we're in the last section here. I know that was just a lot of random things throughout it, but if you found any of that interesting and you want to start hacking Web3, we've got some resources here. So one of my favorite books, Mastering Ethereum, great introduction to all the concepts of Web3. Hands-on smart contract development is another really good book. On the Bitcoin side, Mastering Bitcoin's good. For Solidity Coding, so we didn't even talk about this, but smart contracts generally are written in smart contract language called Solidity. That's one of the more popular ones. There are others, and there's a lot of free resources out there. I highly recommend checking out the Crypto Zombies dApp building game. It's like even if you don't have a whole lot of experience in coding in general, that one walks you step by step through. And I think it's a really good just introduction to Solidity in general. There are paid resources out there too. CTFs, both Steve and I love doing CTFs. Actually, we should have tossed the one in here from Anchain, the iHack NFT CTF. They were just on our podcast a couple weeks ago and talked about one that's coming up. I think it's next week, isn't it?
Yep. I'll throw it into the Discord.
Cool. So yeah, so these are free resources out there to go and just learn about the various exploits that you could carry out on smart contracts. And then there's a ton of bug bounty programs out there. So one of the things I find fascinating is the value that crypto-related organizations will pay out for bugs that you find. It's insane. So if you go scroll through Immunify's website, so immunify.com, you will see like bug bounties that are like up to $2 million, up to $1 million. It's pretty wild. And we also, so Steve and I also threw together a Quickstart guide. If you want to just go get started in blockchain hacking, we created this blockchain hack site. It's a free guide. It just teaches you how to set up a MetaMask wallet, set up a VM with your own personal blockchain, and then start walking through some of the exploits and the attacks against those blockchains. So key takeaways. So Steve, do you want to do the key takeaways here?
Sure. So Web3 is confusing. It's complex. It is growing in user base. Hopefully it's not as confusing anymore after this webcast. And we definitely need more security pros. So if you're interested, go check out the Start blockchain hack site and get to hacking. There's all kinds of good things out there to be incentivized to go hack stuff. These hacks typically result in a significant loss of funds, right? We're talking not just, hey, somebody stole my wallet, I lost a couple $100, but hey, I lost my Bored Ape NFT that's worth 5 million, maybe 10 bucks tomorrow, but today it's worth 5 million, or whatever. But these exchanges and things that are getting hacked, it's big money, it's big targets, right? We hear most of it being the result of a smart contract hack in Web3, right? But it's only part of the problem. We do have traditional Web2 vulnerabilities, and the fact that social engineering is still highly prevalent in this space and probably always will be, just because of the money that's behind it, and the fact that humans can and will continue to be manipulated via social engineering. So those 4 things are our key takeaways from this. Hopefully you learned a bunch. Feel free to follow us on Twitter. Beau and I are on there. Check out the Blockchain Hacks Quickstart Guide. Our podcast, we try to do it every week, but we don't always get there, and we come and go with the news. But check us out there, follow us, and smash our subscribe button. Same thing with the Black Hills Information Security website and Twitter and YouTube. So thank you.
Thanks, guys. That was a lot of content. For anyone that's sticking around for the next minute or two, we'll try to answer some questions if any pop in that are simple to answer. But I wanted to say, like, why do you two learn so much? What makes it about you two? Because you're constantly like learning. What's the thing that makes you want to learn?
Well, I mean, it's curiosity. I feel like a cat in this space, right? It's just all new and exciting. And there's, here goes a laser. Oh my God, I gotta go chase it and go down this rabbit hole, right? It's just so much to learn, especially with Infosec. And that's what we try to do with the CoinSec podcast, is bridge the two, because we think and we see the two merging as far as security is concerned. So it's just really interesting, I think, for both of us. And it keeps us on our toes, right? We have to be watching Twitter every day. We have to be keeping up with the latest hacks and coding languages and things like that. So it's just fun, keeps you sharp, and always on your toes.
Mm-hmm. And Beau, what about you? Same?
Yeah. So he said curiosity. I would say necessity, right? So similar concepts. But I find that anything that I need for work, or if I'm curious enough to go down a path that hasn't been explored before, I just keep going, and it's hard to stop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What I love about the two of you, and this is me just, like, hey, that's what I like about Beau and Steve, is that you don't keep the stuff to yourself. Like, everything you learn is, you're just like a conduit of, like, it comes in here and it goes right out here. It comes in here, it goes out here. And you do that with your training. You do that with your podcast. You do that with webcasts. And so I appreciate it. I think the rest of us appreciate it too.
Yeah, that's kind of the spirit of Black Hills, right? Is just give back and let everybody learn from the things and mistakes and all the good stuff that we've done in the past. So
I think the only question I see right now, and we'll end on this, is how do you mitigate against session ID token theft?
That's a session expiration. You can set your browser to clear cookies and things like that when you exit the browser, which will clear them from your system. Because a lot of the things that we do is we compromise somebody's host, and then we can steal all their cookies and stuff from the browser. You can also do that with phishing, and you have to be cognizant of the websites that you're visiting and things like that.
Right, and also, I mean, this is definitely not like crypto specific by any means, but like if we were looking, I teach a cloud class, so I'm thinking Azure, and I'm thinking of O365 and conditional access policies, right? And geolocation. There's a lot of things that you can tie to where somebody's authenticating from, and especially with access tokens, you can expire them based off of where they're authenticating from too. So I would say, looking at blocking unknown geolocations from certain users, that kind of thing. Might be a good path there. That's the only question we got. Oh man.
Yeah, I mean, there's others. This is a comment, not a question. Just wanted to say, awesome presentation. And I'm a big fan of your podcast. Keep up the work.
Cool.
Sweet. We do have a podcast.
That's a good way to.
Yeah. Definitely. Cool.
All right, so we're gonna do final thoughts. Beau, you first, then Steve, and then put up.
Thanks for hanging out, everyone. Yes, thanks for hanging out. I know we had what looked like maybe around 400, 500 people or so. To me, that's crazy, because I love the idea that 500 people are even interested to hang out for an hour listening about blockchain security. So that's awesome. Thank you guys for hanging out.
Yeah, same thing. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. We're always looking for new ways to impart our knowledge, and these webcasts frequently are great. If you have any feedback, things we can do to improve, knowledge that you want to, understand better, hit us up in Discord. There's a blockchain sec channel in there for BHIS too. If you want to chat in there, we're always around.
All right, everybody. If this was your first time joining us for Black Hills Information Security Webcast, or your 700th time, we do this pretty much every week, and we show up and we share our knowledge, and we try to make it 99% content and 1% marketing. Here it goes. If you ever need a red team pen test, threat hunt, or if you want help with your blockchain security, let us know. You can find us at Black Hills Infosec. All right, everybody, that's it. We'll see y'all next time. Bye-bye. I'm going to kill it. I'm killing it myself. I can hit the button today. Yay.